The truth is that you're dead already, and that we can't kill you. Your heart stopped when you got the call. The man on the phone was the one who killed your body. Your corpse was the only thing that was real to you, and that's over now. You're free to come and go from your own dream, and all the things in your dream are real too. Your eyes aren't open, so you can't see me or anybody else. You can't hear us either. You can't feel anything except what we want you to feel. But you're not alone. You're with everybody. You're with the dead and the living, and the things in between. The truth is that it's been going on forever. You're in a war that's been fought since before there was a world. The truth is that it will go on forever too. And that's why I'm here. The world, said the woman at the window, is a much more complicated place than any of us thought it was. And we all have a part to play in the changes that are coming. She paused. Then she said, I hope you like your new job. It's the last one you'll ever have. The woman with no name watched her with her pale green eyes and turned around and went out. The man at the window followed her and closed the door behind him. The room was very dark now. There were no lights. All he could see were the shadows of the things in the room and the patterns of light and darkness they made. He was hungry and thirsty. He felt his lips moving as he tried to remember the names of things. But the things in the room had no names. They didn't exist at all. There were no food and there was no drink. And the room wasn't a room or even a house. It was a place that might be called the middle of nowhere. He didn't know how far away from anything he really was. It might have been a few inches, or 100 miles or more. It was a place where nothing had any meaning at all. It was a place without space, and without time, and without life or death. It was a place that didn't have any laws. A man stood up and started to walk. There was no direction in any of it, so he just kept on going. He was in a place without a way back. He was lost, but he didn't care about it. He didn't care if he never found a way out, or never found anything again. There was no reason to try to find something he couldn't reach. If you looked for it, it wasn't there. So he stopped looking. He walked and he walked and he walked until he was hungry and thirsty again. Then he stopped and he sat down to wait until he got hungry and thirsty again. Then he remembered that there was no such thing as hunger or thirst. Because there was no such thing as food or drink. There was no time or space either, so there couldn't be anything that needed them. There was no ground or air or sky, so there couldn't be any such thing as walking or sitting. And there was no thought, so there could be no memory. He was just a shape without form or meaning. He couldn't feel anything. He couldn't think anything. He couldn't move anywhere. He was a ghost, but he didn't know that yet. He just knew that he was a person with a name and a past and a future, but he didn't know what any of those things were. The man at the window opened his eyes. He wasn't sure that he'd ever closed them. He couldn't remember doing so. He looked at the dark room around him. The light from outside seemed to have changed, but he wasn't sure if he changed with it or if the room had changed while he slept. He sat up slowly, and his head spun with dizziness and confusion. He got to his feet and felt the walls around him with his hands. They felt smooth, as if he were touching something that didn't exist. He went back to the window and looked outside, but it was just as dark as ever. He turned around and looked at himself in the mirror. "What's my name?" he asked aloud, and the sound of his voice seemed to echo in the room. He reached out to touch himself, but his hand passed through the mirror as if it weren't there. Then he remembered that he was a ghost, and there wasn't any mirror anyway. His hand went through his own reflection. He reached out for something else, to see how far his arm would go, but his arm stretched right out into empty space. He backed away from the window and sat down on the bed, looking at the wall behind him. Then he remembered that there was no such thing as a wall, because there was no such thing as a room, so there couldn't be any such thing as a wall or a floor or a ceiling. He got up and sat down on the floor, looking at his bare feet. "What's my body?" he asked aloud, and his voice echoed in the room. He reached out to touch his foot, but it didn't matter how far he stretched out his arm. The foot went straight through his hand and he felt nothing. He tried to sit up again, and his legs crumpled under him. He fell backward onto the floor, but he couldn't feel the impact of his fall. He lay still, waiting to feel something again. Nothing came. He got up and sat down again. "What's my name?" he asked aloud. "What's my past? What's my future?" He remembered that he had died, but he still didn't know what that meant. It felt as if he had forgotten something very important, but he didn't know what it was that he'd forgotten. He went back to the window and looked outside again. "What am I doing here?" he asked himself, and he heard the sound of his own voice echo in the room. He put his hand through the window as far as he could reach, but he felt only empty space beyond his fingertips. He took a deep breath and tasted air in his lungs. but he didn't feel anything, not even hunger or thirst. He looked up at the window and saw that there were no windows there. Then he looked down at his hands and feet and saw that they were nothing but empty shapes that looked like nothing at all. And then he saw that his heart had stopped beating and was lying still on the floor in front of him, with nothing inside it but dry dead flesh and empty space. He went back to the bed and lay down on it, looking up at the ceiling. "What am I doing here?" he asked himself, and he heard the echo of his own voice again. He didn't know that there wasn't a ceiling over his head anymore, and that there never had been one, and that there never would be one again. And he didn't know that the floor and the bed and the walls were all just empty shapes in an empty space that didn't even exist anymore. He got up from the bed and sat down in a chair with his hands on his knees, waiting to see if anything would change or happen to him. He waited for days, but nothing happened except that he got hungry and thirsty and tired, and that he sat in the chair for hours without moving or thinking anything at all. He stayed there for so long that he began to feel the same kind of boredom that had been in his eyes when he was looking at the man at the window. He couldn't remember what it was that he'd felt when he'd seen him, or what he'd been thinking about when he'd looked at him, but it had made him feel a little sick in a way that nothing in this empty space could make him feel now. He didn't want to see the man at the window again, but he wanted something to happen again, even if it meant seeing him again. "I need something," he told himself. "I need something to happen." He went back to the window and looked outside again. There were still no lights at the end of the road, but there were still some houses in front of him that were lit up with a strange red color. They were still far away, but he knew they were where he had to go to find something to happen. And if they were red and warm, it must be real enough for him to get to them. So he stood up and started to walk away from the window into the dark. "Wait," he said out loud, but he didn't know whether he was talking to himself or to the man at the window or to himself again. "Wait for me." He walked into the darkness until he could see the light coming from behind him. It was faint, but it was better than being in darkness without even knowing how long it had been since anything had happened at all. He kept walking, following the light as it grew stronger, and he looked back over his shoulder as he went to see where he'd left his body lying on the floor. But he couldn't see it anymore. It was too dark for him to see it, even though there was enough light for him to see everything else around him. He walked faster and faster, following the red light that was getting bigger and bigger, until he felt himself getting closer and closer to it. But then it stopped getting bigger and turned into a house with a red light in every window, as if someone were shining a lantern through all of its rooms at once. He stepped into the light of the house and into the light of its windows, but he didn't look at them at all. He turned around and looked back at his own body lying on the floor in the dark of the room behind him, where it couldn't see him now either, not even with all of its eyes together. He remembered that there was no such thing as a body or a person or anything else anymore, but he didn't remember what it meant, so he went back to look at it one more time, before he forgot what it was that he had forgot. Then he went into the house through the door that was right in front of him.